Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Bonds and Stories, we retell those moments honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. My name is Nora Bennett, 35, and at my aunt's summer luncheon I learned that shame can be served on porcelain. My mother, Elaine Carter, swan-necked and unflappable, tapped a spoon to a crystal glass and said brightly enough for every cousin to hear, "Some of us are still waiting for the right man." The table turned toward me, like sunflowers to the sun. No one noticed the gold band hidden under my blouse, threaded on a thin chain that warmed with my skin. I touched it once briefly the way a diver checks for air. The gesture steadied me, but not enough to stop the sting. I smiled, cut a strawberry I didn't want, and pretended the comment slid off like rain. It didn't. It lodged. If you had asked the neighborhood who Elaine was, they would have said a woman who ironed her napkins and never raised her voice. She presided over fundraisers with the calm of a string quartet. She also presided over me. As a child, I learned her language, gentle corrections shaped like compliments. "Back straight, darling. Bright lipstick can look unprofessional." A Bennett never arrived second. My father Peter translated the rest. He had soft hands from repairing violins, a patient smile, and a talent for making thunder sound like distant traffic. He called me Firefly, winked across the table whenever my mother's standards sharpened, and slipped me off-schedule ice cream the night before exams. When he died of a heart attack the summer I turned 12, the house expanded and the air thinned. Silence grew teeth. Without him, my mother's attention clicked tighter. Report cards were studies in red pen. Friends were audited like tax returns. She straightened me at the shoulder before I left for school, refastened my barrette, and sent me into each day with a checklist that squeaked. The world, she liked to say, respects order. I was expected to become proof. I learned to keep my room immaculate and my feelings in drawers. By high school, I could predict her critiques 2 steps ahead. I joined debate orchestra and the right service club. I smiled at boys from approved families. I graduated first. There was Derek Lawson, son of my father's former client, respectable, polite, and somehow bored while breathing. He told long stories about rowing and shorter ones about me. My mother adored him. College had already been mapped in East Coast pedigree, a profession with initials, a husband from a list. I accepted Columbia to please her and chose comparative literature to please myself. She called the major a lovely hobby before law school. I kept writing papers with margins that strayed toward poetry and pretended the word lovely didn't bruise. She hosted small dinners on my breaks, carefully curated collisions with future surgeons and junior partners in stiff shirts. Between the roast and the tart, she narrated other girls' achievements. Olivia is engaged to a cardiologist. Madeline just bought in Sag Harbor. The subtext didn't require translation. I dated 2 men of my choosing, Marco, who taught me to notice the sky, and Paul, who laughed too loudly when he felt small. My mother measured them as if she were buying drapes. When I brought Theo a curator with opinions about art and socialism, she smiled and asked, "Do curators receive pensions, dear?" I watched Theo fold in on himself like paper. He called me less after that. At graduation, the program listed my honors in fine print. The applause sounded far away. I posed for a photo between my mother and the space where my father should have been. My smile looked correct. I took a communications job at a firm in New Haven because it fit the box labeled respectable. My mother approved of the blazer, the title, the predictable promotion ladder. For 2 years, I did well at work and poorly at breathing. I scheduled myself like a train and wondered why I arrived nowhere. The escape appeared on a rainy Tuesday as an email with a blue logo. Lumen Systems, a mid-sized tech company in Seattle, wanted a communications manager who could translate engineering into human. It sounded like a dare. On impulse that frightened me, I said yes. "Seattle," my mother repeated as if I'd said Mars. "You don't know anyone there. Pack for a year, Nora, and then come home." There's nothing wrong with independence and moderation. I packed for a life and didn't tell her. Seattle opened like a book I hadn't known I liked. The sidewalk smelled of rain and espresso. The water kept turning up at the end of streets like a recurring thought. My rental was a narrow apartment with a view of a maple that dared the window to be a frame. I bought a used bike, learned where the cheapest dumplings steamed at midnight, and spoke less carefully. Lumen Systems was a maze of glass and whiteboards. Engineers argued with diagrams and nicknames. Product managers walked fast, and the coffee machine hissed like a friendly dragon. On my first morning, I got lost between cloud and core, and rounding a corner too quickly scattered a paper cup across a blue shirt. "Oh, sorry," I said, clutching what remained of the lid. The man stepped back, glanced at the coffee constellation on his chest, and grinned. "Improvised galaxy. I've been trying to make this shirt interesting." He offered his hand. "Evan Park backend team. Don't worry about it." He led me to the meeting I was already late for, and then afterward to the snack drawer everyone pretended not to know about. His badge hung crooked. His hair gave the impression it had its own plans. He spoke like someone who enjoyed building things more than winning at them. Our paths kept crossing once at the whiteboard when I rephrased an engineer's explanation for a customer deck, and Evan said, "Exactly, but nicer," again in the elevator when the doors closed on his joke and the laugh followed us down. I learned his parents were a teacher and a nurse in Oregon, that he coded in the quiet hours because they worked, that he disliked titles that arrived before trust. He learned I collected phrases in notebooks and pretended not to take pictures when the light got interesting. On a Thursday after a punishing sprint, a cluster of us wandered to a bar that looked like an attic lamps with mismatched shades and indifferent jukebox, a chalkboard that lied about specials. One by one, the others drifted home until the table was short. 2 beers, and long on conversation. I told Evan my father mended violins, that grief had made our house soundproof, that perfection was my mother's religion, and I had been devout by necessity. He listened without fidgeting. When I said I once loved photography before someone called it decorative, he winced as if the word had sharp corners. "Come on," he said, standing too quickly and startling his chair. "There's a camera shop 3 blocks from here. We're fixing this." It was past 9, and Seattle was damp and shining. The shopkeeper was about to lock up and sighed in a theatrical way before letting us in. Evan asked me to hold 2 cameras, one in each hand, and choose by weight. I laughed, then surprised myself by knowing instantly. The camera sat in my palm like agreement. Back outside, he nodded at the streetlight. "First photo," he said. I lifted the lens and took a picture of the wet pavement, catching a reflection of an orange sign. It looked like the city was learning to write itself. We walked back slowly, trading the kind of questions you can't ask in offices. My mother called late that night, her name lighting my phone with the same cold as a fridge door. She wanted to tell me that Clara Whitman, a girl I knew only as Tidy, had married a banker and honeymooned in Sardinia. I made interested noises at appropriate intervals. When she asked whether I had met anyone serious, I said work was busy and changed the subject. I didn't mention a coffee galaxy or a camera receipt. The next weeks acquired a rhythm deadlines at Lumen that chafed and satisfied runs along the water, when the mist turned to glitter lunches in the cafeteria where Evan and I argued about whether code was more like poetry or carpentry. He brought me coffee without asking how I took it. I started carrying the camera everywhere, like a small, reasonable secret. Once walking past a row of shop windows on a Sunday morning, he stopped and tilted his head. "You stand like you're apologizing for being taller than you are." He didn't say straighten up or smile. He just adjusted his own posture and waited until I laughed and did the same. Another evening, we wandered into a bookstore that smelled like dust and new paper. He picked a novel I'd pretended to have read and bought it for me without commentary. I bought him a spiral notebook with a cover that said build something worth saying because he wouldn't. I sent my mother photos of the view from my apartment, the maple going copper, a ferry slicing the water, because landscape is safer than life. She replied with calendar squares, a cousin's bridal shower, a foundation gala, a reminder that winter flights get expensive. I felt both tethered and far away. The first time Evan reached for my hand, we were waiting at a crosswalk near Pike Place, the light red, and the air full of fish and laughter. His fingers brushed mine like a suggestion. I didn't pull away. The walk sign blinked. We crossed. That night in my quiet apartment, I placed the new camera on the table and the gold band back on its chain against my collarbone. The metal warmed quickly. I shut the blinds, turned off the overhead light, and let the room be the color of evening. I didn't know what exactly I was doing except this: standing a little taller, speaking a little plainer, and choosing to keep the lens pointed at the life in front of me instead of the one other people had framed. The first message from my mother after the camera shop arrived as a calendar invite: Elaine, in Seattle board conference, let's have dinner. It included a reservation at a restaurant I couldn't afford without a corporate card and a note: business attire, as if I might show up in pajama pants. Evan saw the email pop on my screen when we were drafting a launch brief. He didn't read it, only watched my posture fold half an inch. Family, he asked. Deluxe edition, I said. Do you want me to come? For a beat. I pictured the table water glasses reflecting the chandelier, my mother's smile, like lacquer, the crispness of her questions. I think I should go alone, I said, then heard myself add for the first one. He nodded, not as surrender, but as faith. The restaurant smelled faintly of truffles and a little like nerves. My mother was already seated, spine impeccable, a martini without a fingerprint in front of her. She stood and kissed my cheek, leaving a cool imprint. You look well, she said, which from her meant passable. She glanced at my blazer. The color is assertive. It's navy, I said. Exactly, we ordered. The waiter poured a description of halibut. My mother asked about my work with the polite intensity of a surgeon evaluating a chart. And what is Lumen Systems again, she asked. A technology company. In computers. She did not inflect it as a question so much as a classification. And this role of yours, communications, does it have a ladder? Or is it more of a floating island? It has a team, I said, and targets and budgets, and all the joys of spreadsheets. She smiled. Stability is a comfort at your age. 35 isn't a ledge, I said lightly. It's a sidewalk. She tipped her head. Speaking of sidewalks, have you been seeing anyone? Her tone adjusted friendly radio host. Seattle seems to be full of men in fleece. I took a sip of water. Work has been busy. Busy is a choice. She dabbed her mouth. I bring it up because I ran into Andrew Pierce at the club. Remember Olivia's brother, Columbia business, now at Westbrook Capital. Wonderful boy. He's in Bellevue for a project and asked about you. I had no memory of Andrew beyond a haircut. That's kind of him. I told him we'd all have dinner. She waved the waiter over, not to order, but to belong. Tomorrow, if you're free. I'm not, I said. You'll make time. Ambition should meet ambition while it's still ambitious. There was a moment, small, precise, when I could have said I'm seeing someone. I felt the sentence coil under my tongue, restless and warm. The ring on my chain pressed a dot of heat against my skin. I left the sentence there unspent. The next night, despite my refusal, a group, my mother, 2 of her board acquaintances, and Andrew with his enthusiasm, found me at a lounge near her hotel. Evan had walked me there planning to peel off, but the group arrived at once as if summoned by lighting cues. My mother's smile skimmed over Evan, the way one might skim a stone across a lake, touch, skip, gone. And who is this? She asked, voice bright as ice. This is Evan, I said. We work together. Evan offered his hand. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Carter. Elaine, she corrected. And what do you do at Lumen, Evan? Back-end engineering, he said. I build things people don't see but hopefully feel when they work. How? Poetic, she said, a compliment shaped like a paper cut. The seating arranged itself with a choreography of habit, my mother beside Andrew, me opposite Evan at the fringe. The conversation was a glossy magazine, private equity, ski conditions, a restaurant that refused to seat anyone in sneakers. Evan asked Andrew a question about a community grant Westbrook had cut. Andrew explained margins with the patience of someone introducing a dog to chess. After the second round, my mother leaned toward me sotto voce. He seems nice. I heard the italics. But don't you get tired of translating? For who, I asked. For the world, she said. For men who don't already speak yours. I understand Evan perfectly, I said. That's not what I meant. I went home with Evan. We walked the long way. The city was wet, and the lamps had halos. On my couch, he didn't ask for a post-mortem. He handed me a glass of water and let me start when I could. She invited him, I said, finally. She invited all of them. Will she keep doing that? He asked. Yes. The answer arrived before the question finished. He curled into the corner of the couch, not withdrawing, but making room. Then we should decide what we do when she does. We, he said, as if there were no other pronouns available. The invitations multiplied. Not always men. Sometimes opportunities shaped like men. A breakfast with a rising star cardiologist. brilliant, with excellent family. A gallery opening with a litigator dances. Nora, his foxtrot is famous. A charity dinner where a hedge fund manager auctioned his sailboat weekends, and my mother auctioned me with her eyes. I declined most. The few I attended I escaped from with the grace of a cat dodging a bath. Each refusal was logged in my mother's voice, as data, a pattern, a concern, a failing. She called more often. The calls arrived at strange hours and included weather reports from Connecticut renamings of my choices and cheerful news of engagements that had nothing to do with me. Clara Whitman is pregnant, she announced one Sunday, as if the information were a compliment I'd failed to earn. It's all happening for everyone. It's happening for me too, I said. Is it? The gentleness sharpened. You sound tired. I'm working. A woman can work and live, she said. But she has to choose the right work and the right life. Otherwise, she ends up decorative. I looked at the camera on the table. I'm not a vase, I said. Of course not, she said, surprised. You're my daughter. That night, Evan and I lay in bed, the room a country of shadows. She isn't going to like me, he said into the ceiling. She doesn't know you, I said. She thinks she does, he said. I can hear it in your voice when you hang up. You're hearing me, I said, pre-editing the fight we didn't have. He was quiet a long time. I can take not being liked, he said finally. I can't take watching you be whittled. The word lodged. I turned to him. Then come to dinner, I said. With your mother. He laughed, not unkindly. Isn't there a better battlefield? There are only tables, I said. Let's choose ours. We chose a place that smelled like bread and had chairs that didn't squeak. I arrived early. My mother arrived earlier. Evan arrived exactly on time in a clean shirt with a button hesitating at his throat and the small, steady smile he wore when he was building something he believed in. Evan, my mother said, pronouncing the name as if trying it on. Do join us. He pulled out my chair first. My mother noticed. She notices everything. The opening questions were softballs wrapped around stones. Where did he study a state school in Oregon? What do his parents do, teacher and nurse? Does he manage a team? Not currently. Where does he see himself in 5 years? Writing better code, solving. Harder problems, teaching others. Teaching. She repeated, tasting the word. Noble, not lucrative. I get paid well, he said. For now, she said. But building a life requires scalability. Evan took a sip of water. I build things that scale. That's what I do. And yet you're not in management, she said. Not everyone wants to steer the same way he said. And yet she said again and let the sentence do what it wanted. I watched the old choreography try to start the part of me that explained, softened, filled the air between expectation and reality with stories that made the difference palatable. I didn't move. Evan didn't either. The air held. Between the main and dessert, she pivoted, describing a man from home who had made partner and asked about me. She recited his resume with the fondness some people reserve for nephews. Evan listened without wincing. When he excused himself, my mother leaned in. Nora, she said very gently, you are radiant when you talk about work, but the rest of your life is unclaimed. He's pleasant, but you know how this goes. You'll carry the ambition for both of you until you're too tired to carry anything. I'm not carrying him, I said. She sat back. Then he will carry you. Either way, you're carried. Evan returned. My mother smiled at him larger this time and told an anecdote about a yacht party on Long Island that had the decency to be brief. The check arrived and she reached for it with the confidence of someone accustomed to winning. Evan was faster. She let him pay, which was a test he didn't know he'd passed. Outside, the evening was silver around the edges. My mother kissed my cheek and touched Evan's arm with 2 fingers, the way one checks the temperature of a dish. Thank you for dinner, she said. Nora, I'll call you tomorrow. When she had swept away, Evan exhaled in the shape of a soundless laugh. That went somewhere. That was civil, I said. That was a chess opening played with flowers, he said. Are you okay? I am, I said, and felt for a minute that I was. The next day my mother called at lunch. He's kind, she said without preface. Kindness is not a plan. Neither is contempt, I said. We're not talking about contempt, she said. We're talking about advantage. You were raised to recognize it. Don't pretend you don't. Advantage isn't a person, I said. It's exactly that, she said. And it chooses you or it doesn't. Something inside me, small, stubborn, stood up. "Don't talk about him like weather," I said. "He's not a system passing through." Silence hummed. "Then I'm concerned for you," she said. "That's all." "I know," I said. "That's the problem." My mother's concern became strategy. She bumped into acquaintances in Seattle with alarming frequency, and those acquaintances came with sons. The dinners multiplied. After one such evening, a man with a watch heavy enough to vote cornered me on a balcony and said he could mentor me toward a better job, by which he meant something as old as balconies. I left early, my coat flung over my dress like a refusal. Evan watched the pattern hands in his pockets. He did not ask me to choose, but a quiet gravity entered his voice, a weight reserved for load-bearing beams. One night after my mother left town, and the apartment had exhaled, he stood by the sink drying a glass and said, "We need boundaries." "I have some," I said. "Not between you and me," he said. "Between us and the pressure." "The pressure is my mother," I said. "And also what she wakes up in you," he said. "I can be patient with Diane. I can't be patient with the version of Nora who disappears because Diane is in the room." "I don't disappear," I said. "You dim?" he said softly, like someone turned the switch halfway. "And then you apologize to me for the dark, and I tell you it's fine, and it isn't." I sat down. "What does a boundary look like?" He set the glass down too carefully. "Sometimes a boundary is a sentence you say out loud, even if your voice shakes." "What sentence?" "That your life is yours," he said, "and that if anyone speaks to you in a way that makes you smaller, they don't get to keep speaking." "You mean my mother?" "I mean anyone," he said. Then after a beat, including me, we practiced ridiculous and sincere in the kitchen, me saying, "That comment was unkind. Please don't say that to me again." Him replying as every possible antagonist until we both laughed and then didn't. It felt theatrical until it felt like spine. The rehearsal had its performance sooner than I wanted. My mother arrived unannounced on a Sunday with a suitcase whose wheels purred and an itinerary of our days. She made herself at home the way Ivy does. By evening, she had commented on my chairs too low, my job too volatile, and my hair too much. When Evan suggested dinner together, she pleaded a headache. An hour later, she texted a photo of a salmon she was enjoying at a different restaurant. I called out her. "If you don't want to eat with us," I said, "say that. Don't pretend." "Pretend," she repeated. "Darling, you're being dramatic." "Then I'll be clear," I said. "Don't speak to me like that." Silence glittered on the line. "Is this Evan?" she asked finally. "Has he taught you this tone?" "This is me," I said, "and the tone is mine." She hung up. I stood in the kitchen with my phone in my hand, my pulse in my teeth, and the strange exhilaration of a door that had finally found its hinge. That night, Evan and I fought. Not about the sentence, he was proud of that, but about the prospects of this new geography. He paced. I sat. The argument found all the sharp furniture in the room. "I don't want to be the wedge," he said, palms open. "You're not," I said. "She is." "She's your mother," he said. "She's a person," I said. "And people don't get to break other people because of titles." He went very still, like someone listening for a sound beneath the floorboards. "I want a life with you," he said, "not a campaign." "I know," I said. "I do too." "What happens if she never accepts me?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. The truth lay there a shard. He nodded the way someone nods when a doctor says a word you didn't plan to hear. "Then we should build our life in a way that doesn't require her permission." Meaning we decide what we are," he said. "Not around her, regardless of her." Summer thinned. The city smelled like tomatoes and small gardens and asphalt. Work surged and then steadied. My mother's calls alternated between sugar and salt. I toggled between the tenderness of evenings with Evan and the static in my chest that returned whenever the Connecticut area code appeared. On a weekend that promised rain and made good on it, Evan proposed we rent a car and drive north with no agenda. "Just water and a map," he said. We ferried to Whidbey Island, the kind of place where time took its shoes off. We walked beaches full of stones that looked like sentences with the vowels worn off. We ate chowder at a counter where the waitress called everyone Han without irony. We slept in a cottage with a roof that had opinions about the weather. On the second evening, the sky opened in a way that made my hands quiet. We found a driftwood log and sat. The water kept showing us the same horizon, as if to be certain we understood it. Evan took a small, unshowy breath. "Nora," he said. "I don't have speeches. I have this." He reached into his jacket and brought out a velvet box smaller than a thought. The ring inside was a modest circle of light, a thin band with a stone that caught the usual daylight and made it look particular. "I love you," he said. "I love who I am with you and who you are when no one is choreographing you. I can't promise I'll make everything easy. I can promise I'll stay and build and listen." He looked at me steady, not pleading. "Will you marry me?" The yes arrived without detour. It felt like a hand finding a hand in the dark and knowing the room. He slid the ring onto my finger and the air did not change, but I did. We didn't call anyone. We made dinner on the cottage stove and burned the first pancakes and ate the second. We went to sleep with rain on the roof and the low, persistent thrum of contentment in our ribs. Back in Seattle, the ring felt both obvious and intimate, like a truth I wore where the light could see it. I took it off to shower and then on again, not from habit, but from delight. On Wednesday night, I called my mother. I could have told her in person during one of her drop-ins. I could have written a letter and let the words do their work unobserved. I called because my voice wanted to say it. She answered on the first ring. "Nora, darling, you caught me just as I was. I'm engaged," I said. Silence landed between us with the exact weight of a crystal bowl. To whom she said crisp. "To Evan," I said. He asked on Whidbey. I said yes. A sound small disbelieving escaped her. "You can't be serious." "I am." "You've known him what months?" "More than months. He doesn't. What does he?" "Nora, think, please." "I have," I said. Her voice went cool. "Listen to me. You are excited." Excitement is not a contract. Engagements get broken. That's why they're engagements. "I'm not breaking this one." "You're making a mistake," she said. "A large, life-shaped mistake. I will not celebrate it. I will not stand there and watch my daughter vanish into software." "I'm not vanishing," I said. "I'm marrying someone I love." "Then you are choosing him over your family," she said quietly, now the knife wrapped in velvet. "Over me." "I'm choosing me," I said. "Don't be dramatic," she said. "If you go through with this, do not expect me to come. Do not expect me to recognize the arrangement." She inhaled. "Do not call me asking for help when it crumbles." I sat very still, as if motion might spill something irretrievable. "That's not a choice," I said. "That's a threat." "It's clarity," she said. "I have never been unclear." "Neither have I said. "I'm marrying him." She hung up. The apartment didn't move. The city did somewhere beyond my window. Buses and boats, and people who did not know a woman, had just told her mother she would not be managed. Evan came home to find me at the table, my hands behaving like someone else's. He read the room as if it were code, and knelt without ceremony. "Do we postpone?" he asked. "Do we breathe? Do we buy ridiculous cake?" "We get married," I said. "When?" "Soon," I said. Not as an answer to her, as an answer I've owed myself. He kissed my palm. "Okay," he said. "We keep it small." "Small," I said. The word felt like the right kind of shelter. 2 weeks later, we stood in a clearing at Discovery Park, a crown of alder above us, the water insisting on being water beyond. The officiant was a friend of a friend who wore boots and didn't mistake solemn for stiff. Evan's sister cried. His parents beamed like the best kind of weather. My 2 Seattle friends held flowers, and my fear. I wore a dress the color of good paper. Evan's tie was slightly wrong in a way that was exactly him. We said the things people say when they promise each other days. The ring this time, the public one, slid into place. Someone whooped. Someone else shushed. We laughed. Afterward, we ate berries and cake from plates that conflicted with the wind. We went home and lit a candle and let the apartment recognize us. We didn't send announcements. We told those who loved us by voice or by presence. My phone lit with messages that stacked into a column of warmth. The Connecticut number did not appear. At breakfast the next morning, I took the gold band from the chain around my neck, the one I'd worn like a secret, and laid it beside my coffee. I threaded the chain through the new ring and fastened it again. The metal rested against my collarbone, cool for a breath, and then mine. The apartment looked the same and not. Evan brewed coffee with the attentiveness of a ritual. I opened the blinds. The maple offered its ordinary leaves. The camera sat on the table patient. I reached for it, lifted it, and framed the room until the edges made sense. In the afternoon, we walked to the bookstore that knew our names. The owner, who had the grace to pretend surprise, congratulated us with a bookmark shaped like a lighthouse and advice about not lending favorite volumes. We bought a blank journal with stitched binding and a pen that made clean lines. That night, Evan wrote one sentence on the first page in his neat, unambitious handwriting. Today we began. During the week, life resumed stand-ups, bug tickets, small triumphs that don't look like triumphs unless you've chased them. At night, the apartment felt like a place we'd invented and then discovered already existed. The ring left a faint circle on my finger when I took it off to cook. I replaced it before bed, turning it once because I liked the click. I did not call my mother again. She did not call me. We arranged our days without the weather report from Connecticut. The silence wasn't empty. It was a room we hadn't furnished yet. When her number finally appeared weeks later, it was with the peculiar calm of inevitability. I let it ring once, twice, and then answered. My voice sounded like a person who had learned a sentence in a kitchen and kept it. "Hello, Mom," I said. She inhaled the sound of someone about to say something she has practiced. The air waited. The city continued its business. I put a hand on the table, palm flat, and felt the wood answer with steadiness. "Hello, Mom," I said. Her inhale steadied into a voice I'd heard on podiums and in living rooms. "Nora, I've been reconsidering our last conversation." A pause, as if she were selecting forks. "You are determined, so am I. These things do not align." "I'm married," I said. "That part doesn't change." "I won't discuss it as if it were settled. The rustle of papers or a silk cuff. I am in Seattle next month for an Arts Council meeting. We'll talk then, sensibly." The line clicked empty. I held the phone for a few breaths and set it down like china. We did not plan a honeymoon. We planned a Sunday. We walked to the market for berries and good bread. Evan bought flowers that looked like punctuation. We napped and woke and cooked something simple that turned excellent by accident. When I fell asleep beside him, the new ring, a quiet weight on my hand, the apartment felt like a house that had been waiting for its occupants to stop hovering on the threshold. My mother did not call during that week. She sent an email with the subject line, "Addresses for thank you notes," which contained no addresses and no thanks. When she arrived in Seattle, she chose a hotel with a lobby designed for arrivals. I met her there. "You look different," she said after the air kisses. "Is it the hair?" "It's the life," I said. We sat. She ordered tea, the kind that arrives on a tray with confidence. So she said, "Let's be practical. Annul it. You're barely out of the ceremony. You can both pretend it was a mistake." "No," I said. "And if not an annulment, then a long engagement you call a marriage until it isn't." "It is," I said. She folded her hands. "Do you imagine I will be swayed by repetition?" "No," I said. "I'm not trying to sway you. I'm telling you the truth. Truth is often a preface to regret." She lifted her cup, considered me over the rim. "You want my blessing?" "I don't," I said. "I want your respect." She set the cup down. "Respect is earned." "I know," I said. "I've been earning it since I was born." She looked for one startled instant, like someone had opened a door behind her. Then the expression closed tidy. "If you insist on playing house with this engineer, do it quietly. Spare the family the spectacle. Spare yourself the embarrassment when it ends." "It isn't a spectacle," I said. "It's my marriage." "Fine," she said briskly. "Then keep it out of sight. When you speak to me, we will discuss work health, the weather-appropriate subjects. We will not discuss him. Him is my husband," I said. She stood. "I have a meeting." A tight smile. "Remember that discretion is not the enemy of dignity." She left. I stayed long enough to drink the tea she'd ignored. We learned how to live two lives. In one, Evan and I woke to the maples and argued cheerfully about how much garlic belonged in dinner. In the other, I sent my mother photos of sunsets and composed messages so careful they squeaked. When she visited, we staged my old apartment as if I still lived alone, one toothbrush, one pillow, with the case changed, one pair of shoes by the door. Evan stayed with a friend. Sometimes I slept there for a night, the place echoing like a shell. At first, the duplicity felt like an arrangement in a play. Then it became the play. We were good at it, too good. I wore my wedding ring at work, and at home slid it to the chain at my collarbone. When I traveled east, pressed the cooling circle to my skin as if it were a seal. When my mother asked about my weekends, I described farmers' markets and hikes, and carefully omitted Evan's pronouns. When she hinted about men with pedigrees, I let the hint fall to the floor and pretended not to see it. We bought a small house north of the city, a one-story with a stubborn garden. Evan coaxed tomatoes from soil that looked skeptical. He built shelves and misestimated once, and then corrected the angle with a satisfaction that lit his whole face. I photographed the kitchen from every angle and discovered that light liked the kettle best at 9 in the morning. Work advanced. I had a team, a budget, an inbox I tamed with strategies, then with tea. Evan released a feature that made our servers hum instead of growl. He named it after a bird because it left things lighter. One winter, the rain felt endless and then stopped being the point. In a doctor's office with cheerful art, I watched a grainy flicker steady into a rhythm. "There you are," I said without quite meaning to. Evan squeezed my hand. We told no one for weeks, not from superstition, but from a greed for quiet. When I called my mother near the end of the first trimester, I meant to tell her. She began with the gala she had chaired, and the opera she had endured, and a charity brunch where someone who used to babysit me had worn the wrong hemline. I waited for a gap that didn't arrive. "Mom," I said at last. "Yes." Her tone sharpened as if I were about to mispronounce something. The word stuck. The silence pressed my lungs. "Busy," I finished. Cowardice made a tiny mortal sound I pretended not to hear. We told Evan's parents instead. His mother cried into a dish towel and then laughed at the dish towel. His father bought 3 small sweaters and then realized babies grow. We painted the spare room cream and then left it alone because even cream had too much opinion. The nausea passed. The new hunger felt like a friend with poor timing. I stood in the garden one morning holding a cup of tea against a belly that had just begun to name itself and thought of my father. He would have held his ear to my middle and said he could hear a sonata. He would have said my mother was overture and I was crescendo, and this was a theme returning. I told my mother at 22 weeks because I ran out of places to put the truth. "I'm pregnant," I said on a Tuesday. She said nothing. Then nothing turned into air. "Are you there?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Whose child?" I laughed, startled by anger. "My husband's." "Nora?" She said, "Great," with disappointment. "If you insist on this farce, at least don't be vulgar." "There's nothing vulgar about a family," I said. "There is when it's constructed without consent." The velvet slipped off the knife. "You have placed me in an impossible position." "You built the position," I said. "I'm standing in it." She exhaled. "I will send something for the baby." An expensive basket arrived, cashmere so soft it seemed to apologize, tiny slippers that looked unspeakably sad, a card signed with her first name. I left the basket unopened for a week and then took out a blanket in a moment of weakness and found it too warm. Our daughter arrived on a wet Tuesday in October. Evan counted her fingers with a seriousness that felt like prayer. I said her name Juniper and then said it again to hear how it changed the room. She had Evan's dark hair and my father's quiet mouth. When she opened her eyes, it felt like the city turned down its volume to make room. I texted my mother the next day. "She's here. Juniper. We're both well." The phone rang and rang while I fed my daughter and learned the edges of her small, imperious hands. Later, when I called back, my mother asked questions addressed themselves as concern and felt like audit. I told her I had support. I did not say the word husband again. Living truth beside denial strained the walls. We added workarounds the way people add braces to a listing porch. When my mother visited, I moved out for a long weekend, and Juniper stayed with a friend. I invented a co-parent named Sam, who existed as a shadow with good intentions. Each lie needed 3 more to keep it upright. Evan did not lecture me. He held me after the visits while I lay awake and counted my own heartbeats until they slowed. Juniper grew into collisions and joy. She learned to run and then to fall better. She loved Blueberry's books about trains and the word again. The first time she stood in the garden without falling, Evan clapped once as if he had finished a proof. I photographed the dirt on her knees as if it were a medal. On a pale morning in June, an email invited me to the Carter family gathering this year at my mother's house. The subject line was festive. The body included dress code arrival window and a line about celebrating the ties that bind. I read it twice and felt as if someone had tightened a ribbon around my ribs. "I think I have to go," I told Evan. He nodded, nothing dramatic, only a hand on my shoulder that stayed. "You don't have to do anything alone," he said. "I can't bring you," I said. "She'll lock the doors." I know he said. We rehearsed no speeches. We packed a small suitcase that looked bigger than it was. Juniper kissed my cheek and left a faint print of yogurt. Evan drove me to the airport, made a joke about shoes and security, and did not ask me to change my mind. The plane felt like a hallway between lives. My mother's house in Connecticut looked as it always had, immaculate, lacquered, full of flowers, so tastefully arranged, they seemed bored. She greeted me with air and perfume and a once-over I had not missed. "You look thin," she said. "Are you eating?" "I'm fine," I said. She had curated the weekend like an itinerary. The first night was just us, which meant immediate family and selected satellites. The table could have seated a board. She served beef Wellington and poured Bordeaux. In the hallway, framed photos narrated the story according to Elaine, me between them at graduations, me in dresses with acceptable necklines, me as a character who did not complicate the plot. There were no pictures of a baby. At dessert, Aunt Lee asked how single motherhood agreed with me. Her kindness ragged at the edges. Before I found a neutral answer, my mother stepped in. "Some choices are best not revisited in public," she said mildly. I tasted metal. I called Evan from my childhood room. "I can't stay," I said into the dark. "You can leave," he said. "If I leave, it becomes all she says it is," I said. "If I stay, I become what she says I am." He was quiet. "Then be yourself," he said. Not a slogan, a sentence he believed could survive. The next evening brought the full cast cousins, Great Aunt May with her miraculous hat, my uncle, who told stories at the length they happened. The table glittered. My mother stood at the head and offered a toast to family. She singled out a cousin's pregnancy and another's promotion. The congratulations were efficient. "And of course," she said, smiling down the table, "we cheer for Nora's career." She lifted her glass toward me. 35, and still forging her own path. The room softened with the laughter people offer when they aren't sure what else to do. I lifted my glass. I set it down. My hand did not shake. I heard my kitchen practice in my mouth. "I'm not single," I said. Silence arrived and sat down. My mother's smile held a frame fixed to a wall, darling. "I've been married for 3 years," I said, to Evan Park. A dozen micro-expressions traveled my mother's face. Calculation, denial, heat. She did not look at the chain at my collarbone or the ring on my hand as evidence. She looked at the room as witness. "That isn't true," she said calmly. "You wouldn't deceive your mother." "You asked me to," I said. "You told me if I married him, I should do it out of your sight." "That is not what I said," she replied, voice rising a half step. "I advise discretion. You've turned it into deceit." "I wore a wedding ring under my shirt for 3 years to keep peace in this house," I said. "That's not discretion. That's erasure." Someone at the far end inhaled. A cousin murmured my name. Great Aunt May adjusted her hat, which conveyed more judgment than words could. My uncle cleared his throat. "Elaine, stay out of this, Robert," she said without looking. Her gaze returned to me. "And this? Evan. He is the father of the child you refuse to discuss." "Juniper is his daughter," I said. "She is our daughter." The room tilted. My mother reached for the silver-framed graduation photo she kept near her plate and lifted it as if to clarify the cast list. It slipped. The glass struck the table and broke into honest pieces. For a second, none of us moved. "You have humiliated this family," she said very softly. "In my home." "I have told the truth," I said. My voice was ordinary. "In your home." "Get out," she said. The sentence landed without flourish. Chairs made noises. I stood. Someone, Aunt Lee, said my name a different way. My uncle stood too, and put a hand out as if directing traffic. "This is ridiculous," he said to my mother. "You cannot throw your daughter into the night because she married a man you don't prefer." "I can and I am," she said. I looked around the table. Some faces were closed for weather. Some were open and didn't know what to do with the draft. I was old enough to know I could not collect them. "I'm sorry you're hearing it like this," I told the room. "I wanted to tell you sooner. I wasn't brave." I turned to my mother. "You can be angry. You can be disappointed. You don't get to exile me for building a life you didn't design." She lifted her chin the way she did when a board vote went her way. "The door's there." I went to my room and put clothes into a suitcase with the movements of a person who has practiced leaving. I called Evan. He answered on the first ring. "Tell me where he said." "Hotel near the station," I said. "Uncle Robert's driving me." I closed the suitcase. I took one last look at the room that had held a younger version of me, obedient as a music stand. The posters were gone, the books dusted into tidiness, the bedspread changed to something neutral. I turned off the light. In the foyer, my mother stood composed as a portrait. "So you are leaving?" she asked. "You told me to," I said. "You have made your choice," she said. "No," I said. "I have lived with yours." Outside, the air was cooler than it should have been. My uncle's car smelled like coffee and old leather. We drove without the radio. Near the hotel, he cleared his throat. "Your father would have liked the stubborn part of this," he said. "He liked stubborn when it was honest." At the desk, the clerk gave me a key with the kindness reserved for travelers who have left something behind. In the room, I set the suitcase down and sat on the bed the way a person sits on a question. I slept in halves. The morning flight felt like a rope thrown across water. The plane lifted. Clouds behaved like shaved ice. I pressed my forehead to the oval window and closed my eyes. At arrivals, Evan waited with Juniper on his shoulders, and a sign she had colored herself. She yelled "Mama," as if the word required an exclamation point. I folded into them, the three of us, a simple geometry. Evan's hand found mine and stayed there, not squeezing, only present. "How are you?" he asked. "Here," I said. At home, we moved through the day without ceremony. Juniper demanded breakfast and a book, and the blue crayon. Evan put the kettle on. I set the table. The house recognized our weights. When Juniper went down for her nap, I stared at the ceiling and counted the lines in the plaster until they made a kind of map. A text came that evening from Aunt Lee. "I'm sorry. I disagreed with your mother. I hope you'll let me know how you are." Another followed from my uncle, a photo of my father at a picnic I didn't remember. Eyes laughing, a violin case at his feet like a pet. I did not hear from my mother. The silence was not a surprise. I stopped setting a place for it. Days resumed their ordinary shapes. I walked with Juniper to the park and pretended not to time the swings. I answered emails without adding apologies to the ends of sentences. I cooked too much pasta and saved it for lunch. Evan went out for milk and came back with lilies because they were on sale and looked like relief. When I woke at 3 a.m., the panic that used to arrive at that hour had missed its connecting flight. The apartment sounded like a house at peace. I took my camera from the shelf one afternoon and carried it to the garden. The light lay on the basil in complicated ways. I knelt and tried to catch it without making it behave. Inside, Juniper shouted at a stuffed rabbit in a dialect of authority. Evan from the kitchen asked if paprika belonged in anything in particular. I told him it belonged where he wanted it. The phone stayed quiet. I let it. The dark pressed the windows and then receded. The days did what days do. The three of us learned again how to fit into the space we had made, not as a refuge, but as a place with its own gravity. The afternoon went blue, and then ordinary again. Days stacked without drama. A month after Connecticut, an envelope arrived, thick paper, my name written in my mother's handwriting that looked like a ruler taught at discipline. "Nora," it began. No greeting, no date. The ink had a measured calm. "I have considered the events at the house. You deceived me. I do not forgive deception. I concede that my conduct may have made truth expensive. I am not proud of that sentence. I cannot alter what is done. I can alter what I do next." The letter went on in that careful, bridged way, blame arranged beside self-reproach, a woman trying not to step in the holes she had dug. "I do not recognize this marriage," one line said. 2 lines later, "I do not wish to lose my daughter." At the end, "If you are willing to speak on Sunday afternoons, I would like to try conversation that does not end in a slammed door." I read it twice, then again with Evan, who stood quiet as a tree while I moved the paper with my eyes. "Do you want to call?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "on Sunday." We started with weather. She admired Seattle's autumn from 2,800 miles away, and I admired her hydrangeas from memory. The second call moved an inch closer. She asked about work and did not correct my answers. I mentioned Juniper's insistence on blue socks. She said children are often very sure of small things. On the third call, she said Evan's name as if testing a note. "I don't know anything about him," she said. "You do," I said. "You know he makes me calmer. You know he builds things." "Tell me something I would have missed," she said. "He reads instruction manuals," I said. "He likes the parts most people skip." She made a small, unwilling sound that might have been amusement. 3 months after the letter, she asked if she could visit. We said yes with terms. I spoke the sentences we had practiced in the kitchen plain, declarative, not sharp. "This is our home. We'll host you for 3 days. We expect you to speak to us the way you want to be spoken to." "Is this a contract?" she asked, not quite mocking. "It's a boundary," I said. She arrived with a suitcase that obeyed. Her hair was perfect. She held a stiff bouquet and a gift-wrapped box as though both might bruise. Evan opened the door. She extended her hand. He took it. They were two people who had met before, but this time no one pretended it was a coincidence. Juniper ran into the foyer, and then stopped studying the stranger like a cat studying a new chair. My mother crouched slowly as if listening to unfamiliar joints, and offered the bouquet to our daughter. "These are yours," she said. "They need a general." Juniper accepted the flowers and promoted herself to admiral. Dinner was roasted chicken and green beans, and a conversation that wore careful shoes. My mother complimented the seasoning, asked about the origin of the platter, and caught herself before converting either into judgment. Evan talked about bird-safe building guidelines. She surprised herself by listening. When Juniper demanded a story, Evan told the one about the dragon who wanted to be a librarian. My mother laughed once a startled bell. That night, after the kitchen was quiet, my mother set her glass down and looked at Evan as if he were a document she had finally decided to read. "I owe you an apology," she said. The words seemed to weigh something in her mouth. "I appraised you like real estate. I did not assess how you look at my daughter. I see it now." She turned to me without softening. "I will never enjoy being wrong." Then almost gently, "But I dislike being blind more." Evan nodded. "Thank you," he said. "I can't compete with your world. I'm not trying to. I'm trying to belong in Nora's." The next day held a small relapse. On the way to the park, my mother glanced at our block of modest houses and said, "You could have bought elsewhere." "We chose here," I said. "Of course," she said. "It's only that." "That sentence ends badly," I said, steady. "Please don't." She stopped as if pulled back by an invisible belt. "Noted," she said. The word sounded new. In the afternoon, she helped Juniper build a tower from wooden blocks and pretended not to be personally offended when it fell. She asked Evan to show her the vegetable beds, and he did describing mulch without irony while she kept her shoes on the stone path like a treaty. In the evening, she took out a photo album me with crooked bangs, my father with his case of summer where everything was yellow. "For Juniper," she said, "so she knows faces the way she knows letters." On the last morning, she stood in the doorway with her luggage and looked around as if memorizing furniture. "I will come again," she said, "if invited." "You'll be invited if you treat us like hosts," I said. "Hosts," she repeated, "not subordinates." "Not subordinates," I said. She nodded and kissed my cheek. When she reached for Juniper, our daughter allowed one quick, sticky embrace and then returned to a puzzle. My mother took the hint without offense. At the curb, she touched Evan's sleeve the way she might test a fabric. "You make good coffee," she said, which from her was close to kindness. The door closed. The house exhaled. Evan leaned his forehead against mine. "You were clear," he said. "You were kind," I said. "It helps when the coffee's good," he said. The visits continued, not regular enough to be ritual, not rare enough to be legend. Some went smoothly. In others, she made a comment about our street, or my hair, or the way Evan stacked plates, and I redirected her with the same words every time. "That was unkind. Please stop." She stopped more often than she didn't. When she slipped, she apologized afterward, awkward as someone learning a new instrument. On Juniper's 4th birthday, my mother flew in with a gift wrapped like a promise, and a dress she admitted she had almost told me to iron. She arrived early to help hang paper lanterns, and stood in the kitchen holding tape as if it were a rare tool. During cake, she leaned toward Evan and said, "Your frosting is exuberant." Then she added, "I like it," before either of us could react. Later, when the guests were gone and the house wore streamers like a hat left on too long, I found my mother on the back steps looking up at a sky that was taking its time getting dark. I sat beside her, leaving one stare between us. We didn't speak for a while. The garden smelled like tomato vines and sugar. "Your father would have approved of the hullabaloo," she said eventually. "He thought noise meant life. He made noise sound like music," I said. "He did," she said. After a pause, "I have not said this often." She considered the sentence, measured it. "I am impressed by you. Because I married outside your map, I asked. Because you are steady, she said. I mistook steadiness for defiance. Sometimes it is both. She reached over, not to pat, but to hold my hand. It startled us both. We sat that way a while, two women whose fingers had been taught different languages finding a phrase they could share. Inside, Evan was rinsing plates and making the water sound like rain. Juniper ran out with a plastic crown and declared us queens of the patio. My mother bowed gravely and ceded the title. Later, when the house slept, I walked the quiet rooms. The maple gave its shadow to the wall. The photo album sat open on the coffee table, my father grinning at a picnic we had finally remembered the details of. I closed the cover gently and turned off the lamp. In bed, Evan rolled toward me, one arm heavy across my waist, his breathing a metronome that had learned my song. I lay awake a little while, listening to the house learn our weight again after visitors the way Wood remembers. In the morning, Juniper climbed between us and announced a plan involving pancakes and block towers. The three of us negotiated syrup. The kettle began to sing. The day waited plain and generous. I reached for the camera on the chair and framed the table the smallest picture of a life and pressed the button before anything moved. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.